Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Mandiant Cloud Security Briefing. I am Andrew Kopcienski. I'm an intelligence analyst for Mandiant and Google Cloud. I specifically work with people like John Hultquist, like Sandra Joyce, mostly to focus on what we call strategic communications for intelligence. This really kind of focuses at its essence on how to tell all of the cool stories that come out kind of across security, all across Google Cloud, and delivering those cool stories to audiences like yourself, internal and external, as well as helping a lot of people across Google Cloud tell all of the cool stories that we find. So I'm here today for a couple of different reasons. One, we are just shy of the 1-year mark of Mandiant officially becoming part of Google Cloud, which means we pretty firmly have our feet kind of on the ground. We have an understanding of where we kind of sit across Google security. And really, most importantly, we've gotten through the process of kind of widening our lens and understanding this kind of broader perspective that Google has always had. Two, the last 18 months in cybersecurity, for those of you who have been paying attention, really have been probably the most dramatic shifts that I certainly have ever seen in my career. Most people who I've spoken to agree that we are in a dramatically different place than we were about 18 months ago, pretty much across the board, which is interesting to see. When I was kind of preparing for this presentation, I found a dozen really different metrics, looking at kind of 100 different aspects of really what boils down to the same thing, which is measuring the use of cloud computing and cloud in general across pretty much all industries. And they all pretty much agree. Every industry out there continues to rise in their use of cloud environments, cloud ecosystems, cloud resources. And this rise in cloud adoption really has been pretty great for most industries. There's been a kind of an overall drop in the price of storage, the cost of computing efforts, all the different resources that come along with cloud. But this widespread adoption of cloud really has resulted in a much wider, what we call attack surface for malicious actors. And so what we're seeing now is this kind of broad increase in the number of actors targeting cloud environments, and almost more importantly, an increase in the reasons behind those attacks. The actors that we track from all sorts of different motivations are regularly targeting cloud environments, and they're doing it in increasingly brilliant ways. So what I'm here today to kind of talk about is who we see targeting cloud environments, how they're doing it, and most importantly, why that matters for those of you who are interested in cloud security. We're going to focus first and foremost on what we call initial access TPS. That means how they're getting in. The very first step in the attack chain that attackers use when they're breaking into some sort of cloud environments. And while we're talking about this, and really throughout this whole presentation, I want you to keep one phrase in mind. You don't need to break in if you can steal the keys. This is really kind of central to a lot of the tactics, the techniques, the procedures that we've seen from all of these different actors who've been targeting cloud for some time. So let's start with, to me, what is kind of the scariest realization in cloud security today. So depending on the sources you're using to gauge this metric, depending on who you ask and where you're looking, about 60 to 70% of the compromises that we see as a security apparatus inside cloud environments begins with credential compromise. And when some of my colleagues first told me that, my jaw kind of hit the floor. But really, to understand why that's so shocking, I want to put this into perspective. When I say 60 to 70% of compromises begin with stolen credentials, what that means is phishing, spear phishing, vulnerabilities, supply chain compromises, any of the other tactics that actors use to break into a cloud environment combined are less common in what we're seeing than credential compromise. Why? The simple fact is, and I'm sure everybody here knows this, taking an entire organization, any organization, and conducting this kind of major move to a cloud or a hybrid environment, or even using cloud resources in ways that you haven't used them before, is really, really difficult. It's tricky, It's technically difficult. It's a personnel nightmare depending on your organization. In many cases, from this kind of personal perspective, it's never going to leave anybody happy at the end of the day. Nobody's going to say, wow, I had a great day today integrating into this new cloud environment. But the one thing that we continue to see is the thing that makes it easier for people inside your organization, your engineers, your sysadmins, your network folks, your service folks, your security folks, the thing that makes it easier for them to do their job well and do their job happily is breaking down who can do their job and who has access to what different parts of your organization inside everything that you own based on identity. This isn't a secret. Identity access management is kind of the core of beginning cybersecurity inside a cloud environment. Your service accounts need to make sure that they can fix problems based on everybody who's using services. Your security folks want to go into any part of your organization, whether it's cloud or hybrid or on-prem, and they want to find the bad stuff and fix it. But the truth is, like I said, the easiest way to actually get a cloud or hybrid environment to work, or even just not to break, is to manage who can see what and to use their identity as a way to control access. Unfortunately, we are not the only people who have realized that. Malicious actors have realized that as well, and this isn't just useful for good guys. What we're starting to see is bad guys have realized exactly how powerful credential access has been, to the point where we are starting to see some attacks where actors are burning incredibly valuable and powerful 0 days just so they can ensure that they can get access to a cloud environment or other environment and get access in a way that allows them to then steal credentials. That means one of the most powerful, sophisticated tools that an actor can bring to an attack is being used in an end game, really just to steal credentials. This isn't the only type of compromise that we've seen, though. There are plenty of other ways that actors can go about conducting intrusions, and even though there is an easy path comparatively when it comes to credentials, that's not always the path that we see these actors take. Vulnerabilities, and specifically vulnerabilities in the software or hardware systems that sit right at the perimeter of a network, are also extremely dangerous for actors who are trying to compromise a cloud environment. And in fact, some of the cases of vulnerabilities inside cloud environments can actually be much more dangerous than stolen credentials for the wider community. I want to talk about why. Everybody in here is aware that, for the past several months, every time there's a big 0 day that comes out, there's a huge cycle. But especially this year, it might seem like you're hearing about new 0 days every other week. And we're going to dig into this a little bit more in a bit. But if you go all the way back into the distant past and think about some of the worst vulnerabilities that have hit, Log4Shell, for instance, I know many of you had a shiver of fear that went down the back of your spine and hearing those words. But the reason that Log4Shell was particularly dangerous wasn't because it was widespread or because it was easy to execute. The reason that it was dangerous is because the ability to execute Log4Shell on a system that was running Log4j was trivial and easily available. Everybody who wanted it had access to that script, and it made it very easy for them to use it. When we see vulnerabilities being used at the pace at which they have been over the past 18 months, really, and several years even further, we start to see the risks really start to hit home when some of these vulnerabilities become publicly available. But again, cloud vulnerabilities not the only thing out there that's causing a lot of trouble. Misconfiguration, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Everybody knows it's difficult to get everything working exactly as correctly as you need it to be. But one of the most dangerous things about misconfiguration is that it allows certain actors opportunistic access on a one-off basis based on mistakes made inside your organization or with the ways that you interact with other organizations. Very, very difficult to catch unless you know exactly where to look and how to identify some of these misconfigurations, but again, not the most common. And the last TTP that I want to talk about is supply chain compromise when it comes to software. This is a really fascinating example, and again, one of the examples of initial access that is particularly dangerous when we talk about scale. If you go back in time and think about one of the most dangerous software supply chain compromises that's happened in recent years, if you go back to the SolarWinds breach, one of the problems with SolarWinds was that the initial access of those particular actors, who we now know to be APT29, were able to gain initial access to about 18,000 victims. At the end, they only compromised about a handful of them. But the problem with software supply chain compromise is that it allows actors to gain massive amounts of access based on one particular attack chain. In the hands of someone like a ransomware group, the SolarWinds campaign would have been devastating and would have resulted in a huge, huge amount of compromises that would have potentially crippled some serious industries. These are the kinds of threats that we're really, really concerned about when it comes to tracking what particular methods these actors are going to use to gain access to a cloud environment. But I want to talk more specifically about who we are worried about. If you know anything about Mandiant, you know that cyber espionage is one of our biggest concerns. This is where we spend a lot of our time and effort in tracking state-sponsored groups that are conducting cyber intrusions. They are the most dangerous, generally, and most sophisticated types of actors that we track, so it's no surprise that we've seen the most dangerous and creative methods used to compromise cloud ecosystems come from exactly these kinds of actors. And I want to reiterate that when we say cyber espionage actors, we're talking about actors sponsored by nations to achieve a huge array of different goals. Understanding how these actors are tasked, what their goals are, and what they need to accomplish their mission really is critical to understanding not just why they might come after you, but how, and therefore how to protect yourself. So let's start with the most dangerous group of cyber espionage actors. Far and away, the #1 spot of for cyber espionage actors in terms of danger and sophistication comes from Chinese-sponsored groups. This huge number of intrusions that we see each year, especially in the last couple of years, especially focusing on 0 days, involved an actor tied probably, in many cases, to a Chinese nexus espionage operation. Chinese espionage campaigns have been really interesting for a long time, but specifically in the past couple of years, we've started to see the later stages of an evolution. In the distant past, you would see PRC-affiliated activity focused on social engineering and phishing. Now what we're seeing is that they're focused on hitting what we call edge infrastructure. Like I said, that's stuff that sits right between your network and the internet. We've also seen them improve a lot in their obfuscation and their operational security. They're focused very heavily on developing infrastructure that allows them to conduct a lot of very dangerous attacks. But the past few years, what's really, really shown in cyber espionage campaigns stemming from China is that they have been burning 0 days at a rate that is really, truly staggering. So depending on the circles that you run in on Twitter, you might have seen the phrase hot 0-day summer crop up a couple of times. That is a tongue-in-cheek phrase, but what we're talking about is a very, very real phenomenon. This past summer has been host to some of the most dangerous and worrying 0 days that have come up in the past decade. We've seen a huge amount of effort by mostly Chinese-sponsored groups to use these 0 days in ways that are incredibly dangerous. In the last 2 years, the pace of Chinese 0-day exploitation has accelerated very, very significantly. A lot of the evidence that we've seen of Chinese cyber espionage actors exploiting 0 days was dramatic. We saw 11 different 0 days being exploited in 2021 and 9 in 2022. The number is continuing to go up this year. Half of those 0 days that we've seen that have been targeted and used by Chinese Nexus Ops have been focused on flaws in virtualization software, networking products, and security devices like firewalls, VPNs, and email security appliances. What is important about this is that, like I said, the problem with the 0-day isn't that it's used by one group. The problem with the 0-day is that it targets a vulnerability that does not yet have a patch, and in certain circumstances, if the code used to target those 0 days is released publicly, that is when we are really, really concerned about a growth in significant pace and severity of attacks. These 0 days that we've seen come out from Chinese-sponsored espionage groups really isn't, it's definitely not accidental. The capability to find and use these 0 days certainly isn't something that's happened by chance. What we're seeing, like I said, is the result of years and years and years of effort and investment by Chinese-sponsored groups to build the capability to find and use these 0 days in rapid succession. This is a huge infrastructure at work that is focused almost entirely on finding vulnerabilities and feeding them to some of their offensive cyber operations. And specifically, these vulnerabilities are being looked for in what we call edge devices. Again, the stuff that sits right at the edge of your network between your network and the internet. There's a couple of reasons why that's important, but hiding in the edge primarily allows these actors to do something that other devices on your network don't, meaning that they are outside the normal detection radius of a lot of cybersecurity capabilities. If they're hiding in something like a router, if they're hiding in something like virtualization software, the hypervisors that guide a lot of different VMs, if they're hiding in something like a firewall, none of these things fall within your normal parameters for detecting malicious activity, and it allows them to set up this campaign and sit as close as they can inside their targeted network. The other thing we've seen in a development from Chinese cyber espionage campaigns is this ability to stay evasive out in the wild. They've been focusing on building up this kind of massive IoT botnet. They're using many of these different botnets as smoke screens, and they're using tunneling tools to try and hide a lot of their activity, making it very, very difficult to track some of their activity in the wild. And more importantly, very difficult to actually defend against that activity once it starts hitting your network. The other really surprising sponsor of cyber espionage that I think has posed a significant threat over the past couple of years is North Korea. They've really stepped up their game in the past couple of years, and you kind of have to hand it to them. They are really, really dramatically more dangerous than they have been over the past several years. What we've seen is that this focus has come out of North Korean cyber espionage that really is still doing its classic North Korean intelligence missions. It's targeting defectors, anyone aligned against them on the geopolitical stage. They're specifically interested in nuclear, anything to do with the Korean Peninsula. But the real innovation that's coming out of North Korea is focused on actually funding their ongoing cyber espionage campaigns, and they're turning to crypto to do it. Almost every DPRK actor that we track is in some way engaged in criminal activity, and it's really focused very heavily, like I said, on crypto. Most of it is coming out of some of their general reconnaissance bureaus, but they really have also learned to do some pretty significant and innovative stuff. One of the things that we've learned is that when they conduct a large-scale intrusion and steal a significant amount of crypto, they can't then turn around and spend that crypto immediately. They have to launder it somehow. The innovation here is really fascinating because what they've started doing is investing in the means to mine more crypto, which is in effect actually laundering their cryptocurrency. They buy things like computing power or hash power. They also buy a lot of the GPUs that have been on sale or server space, anything like that, and use that to then mine new crypto and use that scheme and that output of that crypto to then fund their continued operations, sometimes literally to keep the lights on for their offices where they work to try and support their espionage campaigns. Fascinating, fascinating stuff coming out from North Korea in the past couple of years, and very, very dangerous, especially because we've seen them become very competent when it comes to software supply chain compromise. North Korea in particular has become very, very good at software as a service targeting. They've been going after this kind of targeted supply chain compromise. We wrote a blog about this one in particular, but there's another one that has also happened, I think, in the past couple of, several months ago. But the ability to conduct these targeted supply chain compromise attacks is really, really fascinating. And again, a very dangerous capability for North Korea to be displaying in their operations. The other major sponsors of cyber espionage that we want to talk about briefly are Russia, first and foremost. Russia's fascinating for a lot of different reasons, but really, in the past 18 months, they've undergone a very fundamental shift in how and why they do business, and subsequently, a shift in who is going to be likely affected by Russian cyber espionage. The answer to all of those questions is one word: it's Ukraine. They're very, very interested in what's going on inside Ukraine. Any of the campaigns that we've seen that have been focused outside of Ukraine have really focused very heavily on diplomatic and geopolitical support for ongoing Ukrainian resistance to this invasion. Although Russia's down, it's very clearly not out. The Russian GRU, the FSB, so APT 28, 29, some of the other groups that we track as Russian cyber espionage campaigns, Sandworm, Turla, they're still out there. They're still very dangerous. They still have their focus very intensely set on Ukraine, but whether that continues in the future is fluid, and we will continue to see how it develops moving forward based on the outcome of this ongoing invasion. And then the last of what we call the big four sponsors of cyber espionage is Iran. This one, luckily, has been, again, very geopolitically focused. Most of the Iranian special cyber espionage that we've seen has been focused very heavily in their immediate region. They're very concerned with the back and forth between Israel and Iran. There's been quite a bit of other targeting coming out from Iranian-sponsored cyber espionage, but it's very difficult to kind of say with any certainty that they are determined to move beyond their kind of immediate regional focus. Unfortunately, we're not only concerned about cyber espionage when it comes to threats to cloud environments. The big concern that we have, and I think probably the more immediate concern to most organizations out there, is probably coming from cybercrime actors. What's really been fascinating, going back to my original point, is that cybercrime actors, especially you've been tracking them for quite some time, tend to follow a very specific and Darwinian set of principles. They are focused on making the maximum amount of money for the least amount of effort and the least amount of risk. If you've been looking at threat activity for a while, you might be surprised to hear that a lot of the cybercrime actors that we've been tracking for a long time have kind of reverted to form. A lot of what they've been doing lately has been focused very specifically on stolen credentials as a means to conduct intrusions. With the rise in ransomware activity that we saw several years ago really start to kick off, that has shifted now into primarily an information theft game. We started to see this kind of shift years ago in cybercriminal gangs foregoing targeting individual bank accounts and monetary accounts or credit cards and really start to focus on mass targeting organizations. What we're seeing coming out from cybercrime actors with this focus on conducting information theft and holding organizations for ransom is really their latest method in conducting what their prime directive is, which is finding profit doing crime. The interesting thing about the past couple of years is that we've started to see this really rapid disruption in the underground economy in a lot more actors really starting to offer and look for stolen credentials. The other thing that's happening is that beyond just buying and selling stolen credentials, they are buying and selling the means to steal credentials. If you're familiar with kind of the underground actors and their ecosystem, you know that most of what happens in there has really become fragmented as actors have become more specialized. A lot of them have been very, very focused on building out these specific services that are very professional, very well run, that are focused on doing one particular thing. Some of them are initial access brokers, some of them are specifically ransomware brokers, some of them are ransomware developers. A lot of what we've seen over the past couple of years is that more and more actors are expanding this kind of underground market into buying and selling not only credentials, but the means to obtain them. A lot of this actually comes up to what I like to think of as leading indicators. If we go back to the Log4j and the Log4Shell incident, some of the first people who really started to sound alarm bells in that incident weren't big security vendors, it was people running individual Minecraft servers. Because this exploit got leaked, people were scanning for anything running Java in a vulnerable position, and then all of a sudden their servers started dying because it was being hijacked by all of these actors who were just starting to do exactly this cryptojacking thing. In my opinion, cryptojacking probably is an indicator of further compromise. If somebody got in with a cryptojacker, somebody's probably else has figured out how to get into your network. These kinds of threats, though, as they develop, are less of a concern, I think, than what we're seeing right now. This focus on credentials being used to target cloud is not a coincidence. Malicious actors understand that that is the best way to go about not only intruding into a cloud environment, but just running a cloud environment in general. There are a lot of risks that are facing everyone involved with and who uses cloud on a daily basis, and it's very much true that those risks are increasing in number and sophistication. But it's important for me to state that those risks aren't nebulous. They aren't some kind of unknowable inevitability. The key to understanding those risks, the key to countering those risks, is the entire purpose of cyber intelligence. It's our job to track and find and quantify those risks and communicate them to you so that you know what you can do about it. At the very onset of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Sandra Joyce had a very, very excellent point, which is prepare, don't panic. And she was talking specifically about the invasion, but that actually comes in handy for anyone who is concerned about cybersecurity, especially when it comes to cloud. There are a lot of unknowns out there when it comes to cloud. There are a lot of unknowns when it comes to cybercrime, cyber espionage, all of the different malicious actors. Cloud is an evolving space, and the threat actors are learning right alongside the rest of us. They've come pretty much to the same conclusion that we have, that the best way to understand any given cloud environment is to use identity access and see who has access to your org and what they can do with it. And like I said at the beginning, the reason that we're seeing this focus on credentials is because, like I said, it's easier to steal the keys than it is to break in. After nearly a year of Mandiant working inside and alongside Google, I can confidently say that Mandiant and Google Cloud are laser focused on doing our absolute best to help in whatever way we can. There's nobody out there who has a silver bullet. There's no magic bean that's going to make you unable to be compromised. The best thing that you can do is just your best, and our job is to make sure that you are as prepared as you possibly can be to achieve that. I think that's all we have time for, so thank you very much, appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again next year.